This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras here with my co-host James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hey, Thomas.
And we are here with our first episode of the new year. By the way, thanks to everybody who donated in our fall fundraising campaign, which was a great success. Thank you so much. We hope to serve you well with this year's podcasting. And let's go ahead with our first film of the year, In a Lonely Place, directed by Nicholas Ray, came out in 1950, starring Humphrey Bogart as Dixon Steele and Gloria Grahame as Laurel Gray. And you may remember Gloria Grahame as playing the kind of ditzy blonde woman character from It's a Wonderful Life. So we have seen her before on this podcast. We have not done a Humphrey Bogart movie before, so we're excited to do that. This is quite an interesting...
Really? Wow, I hadn't made that connection.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen other Humphrey Bogart, but I guess that's right. We haven't...
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
And my understanding is that this is a little bit of a kind of like off-brand role for him. This is like, he's not playing the hard-boiled detective. He's a little bit more vulnerable. There's a bit more of romantic drama.
Yeah, he's hard-boiled in a way.
Yeah,
but in his own way.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to watch this movie. Is I'd always heard a lot about him specifically in this film and his performance, and so I guess you could consider this a film noir, but it doesn't follow quite the same formula as other film noir films. In this, Humphrey Bogart plays Dixon Steele, an established but somewhat washed up screenwriter in Hollywood. We see him at the beginning of the film being asked to write an adaptation of a pretty dumb novel, but it's something he's going to have to do because, you know, that's just where his career is at right now. And he takes a check coat girl home, ostensibly to have her read or tell him the story because he's not interested in reading it himself. Nothing, untoward happens between the two of them. She gives him the synopsis and he sort of sends her on her way. It's late at night and he's awoken the next morning by a detective and brought down to the station because this girl has been murdered and now he's the prime suspect. He's cleared only on the word of his neighbor, a woman who up until that night he had never met. This is the woman played by Gloria Grahame. And she sort of vouches for him, says, no, I saw him that night. He went to bed. They left separately. She left, separate, alone. And so a relationship is sort of struck up between the two of them. But pretty quickly as this romance progresses and as the investigation continues, trust begins to break down between the two of them. And so that's kind of the film. Yeah.
And there's this tension put on their relationship by this kind of ongoing investigation and this suspicion that hasn't quite been, completely quashed, but also that we see right at the beginning of the movie has a temper, right? So what happens? He's at the bar with some, old show business acquaintances, and there's this young guy who's kind of making fun of this old alcoholic, washed up actor, and he just explodes and immediately hits him.
Yeah, well, even before that, the opening credit sequence, he's driving in a car, and an actress who acted in one of his screenplays pulls up alongside him with her husband, and the husband kind of takes issue with her recognizing him and chatting him up. And Dixon Steele wants to throw down right there, in the middle of the street.
Yeah, in that case, it's he has a little more plausible deniability because the other guy is being aggressive, but he's just ready to go,
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the things that I kind of indicated at the top here was that Humphrey Bogart gives a really interesting and nuanced and dynamic performance. There's a real range in sort of what this character calls for in terms of performance. So yeah, he's flying off the handle, getting really angry. He's playing the cool Humphrey Bogart, hard-boiled thing too. But then he's also vulnerable and kind of, you know, in a lot of ways, like dealing with shame and loneliness and, you know, difficulty with his work. And then also, you know, smitten and in love and then distrusting and heartbroken and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really quite remarkable, all the places that he goes to throughout the film.
I think one of the other interesting aspects of the setup is that pretty much all of the characters in the film are people who have a history with him, except for, you know, Gloria Grahame's character and the police chief. But the detective who first comes to him is an old, like, army.
Yeah.
You know, he was like this guy's army officer, and he later became a detective. And so everybody kind of has certain expectations of how he's going to behave, and kind of depending on who they are, they're going to make excuses for him or not when he flies off the handle.
Yeah.
Especially his his agent, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you got to deal with him. He's the genius, and he can be temperamental, that kind of thing.
That's pretty key. Because I think so much of what drives the excitement in this film, and it's a super exciting movie. It has you on the edge of your seat, really entertaining. What's really driving it is the question, did he do it?
Right.
You know,
Right.
Because, yes, we see him say goodbye to the girl as she leaves, and then it fades to black and then fades right back up, and it's the detective at the door. It's really whiplash, and the effect is quite, you know, it's worth noting because they take you down to the station, and we don't even get to see the reveal, so to speak. We don't even get to see him when he's told she was killed.
Right.
We just see his response. We just see him sort of after he's been told, and he's as cool as a cucumber, you know? And this is strange to the detective, but it's strange to us also.
Right.
And this feeling of disorientation really never leaves us because, we're there at in the detective's, you know, interrogation room, sort of thinking, what's going on? Why is he here? Wait, and we're trying to get our cues from him and how he's behaving, but then that turns out to be unreliable. But it was the same before this, right? As soon as he's sort of striking it up with the coat check girl and then asking her to break off her date and come home with him, we're already kind of in our head going, what is he angling at? You know, is he trying to, you know, get lucky with this girl? Is he really going to tell her to, you know? And so there's this sense in which you can't quite read him from the beginning. And so you're relying on the input of all these other characters who have known him, his agent, the actor, the detective. You know, there's gossip about previous relationships that he's been in, and so you're getting all of this information, and it really tends to send you in all sorts of different ways. You know, the detective is like, you know, trying to warn Gloria Grahame's character, he's hiding something from you, you know, and it's not the proverbial heart of gold. But then we see him going and, you know, buying anonymous flowers for the girl who's been murdered, you know? Later, when he gets into this, you know, another like road rage incident and beats up on this football, this like college football star, ends up in the paper. We see him forwarding money to this guy, again, anonymously, you know, and so it's like, oh, well, does he have this heart of gold? But I also see him doing these terrible things. Yeah. So it's a point of tension that really the film maintains right up until the end for audience and the characters alike.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about his performance already, but it's just very interesting to see him go through these stages of like building tension, rage, self-justification, shame, you know, like the way he looks kind of like defeated and like exhausted after each of these instances is really compelling to watch. And yeah, just seeing how, I mean, this woman, Laurel, she she's physically attracted to him. That's kind of how it starts. She likes his face. That's why she's able to be a witness in the first place, because he was watching him from her balcony. And there's this kind of they embark on this very quick moving relationship, you know. It's like they live in the same apartment complex, so the film is able to kind of have like plausible 50s deniability about like, you know, the nature of like how far their relationship has gone, but like it's like pretty clear that they're, you know, they've got like a highly physical relationship.
Basically overnight, once it's clear that the feeling is mutual, almost overnight they're sort of playing the happy couple,
right?
You know, and so despite the fact that
she's making him breakfast, and you know,
right. Despite the fact that she repeatedly, I mean, it's like 3 or 4 times during the film, she sort of protests like, "What's the rush?" or "Let's not rush into things," you know.
Yeah.
And it's of a different quality throughout the film. If at the beginning maybe she's playing a little hard to get, later on it's actually out of kind of fear of who this guy might be.
Right.
Despite these protestations, they actually do rush into things. It's a really kind of whirlwind romance.
Right.
And I think that too is one of the things that makes the film so interesting, is because they really are getting ahead of themselves. The trust that's required for this relationship to be anything other than toxic is just not there,
right?
You know, and the circumstances of this murder that's being investigated really just serve to highlight that,
right? The
lack of trust.
Yeah, and the question of like, how do you know you really know someone?
Yes,
you know, and so, you know, you've got his old showbiz friends who are kind of willing to justify his behavior. You've got this detective who admires him as a military officer, and knows his kind of quirks, but is, you know, I guess he's willing to go along with the investigation, but he believes he's innocent. And even the scene where he goes to their house for dinner, and they're discussing the case under investigation, and he does this like, you know, he claims his expertise in murder because of his, you know, work as a screenwriter, basically. And so he does this. He has the detective and his wife do this demonstration of like how, because the woman was thrown out of a moving car, and like how could this murder have been done?
Yeah, he's like, first you got to put yourself in the scene, you got to imagine it, you know.
Yeah.
And so he does this little sort of play act with them where he sets them up as though they're the murderer and the victim, and then he's coaching them, kind of instructing them how to move and describing the scene, but it kind of hypnotizes the detective into like
starting to actually choke his wife with his arm around his neck.
And what makes this moment all the more effective is that the camera kind of, you know, pans into his face. We get this spotlight on his face as
on Bogart's
on Bogart's face as the lighting around him darkens, and we get this really ghoulish expression of like excitement, which again is like plausible for a screenwriter who has to kind of cast himself into the minds of his characters,
and a guy with kind of a dark sensibility to him.
Totally. Yeah. But it's,
like in Hitchcock movies, there's a million scenes where like some character is just like randomly speculating with another character about like, if you were going to murder someone, like how would you do it and how would you get away with it? It's a very common kind of trope.
Yeah. But it's one of the things that I think is also remarkable about his performance is that he's always able to thread the needle of like plausible deniability. You know, there's always, in the ways that he's responding, there's always this sort of there's this ambivalence of, well, an innocent person would act this way maybe, but a guilty person would act this way too, you know?
Yes.
And so that's another amazing...
Like, it's not a crime to be, you know, eccentric.
Yes, right. Another amazing scene where this is really evident is when he finally proposes to Laurel. I don't know if you remember that sequence, but she's already starting to have her doubts, you know, and it's based on her, you know, observation of him flying off the handle. It's based on rumors that she's heard elsewhere.
Right.
It's also just...
He has a history of getting into fights and violence. And
yes. You know, and then also just sort of the interloping of the detectives and things that they've told her and pressures that they've applied and things that have kind of gotten into her head. Again, it's just she doesn't know him that well. And so the trust, the bedrock that would be required for sustaining this relationship really just isn't there. But anyway, she's already begun to doubt him. And he's kind of come over in the morning to wake her up and make her breakfast. And there's all these wonderful moments, like him in the kitchen with the grapefruit, straightening out the grapefruit knife and then kind of stabbing into it. You know, he doesn't know how to cut a grapefruit. He doesn't even know that a grapefruit knife is supposed to be curved. But also he's holding that knife an awful lot like a serial killer would, you know? As he's sort of, and so there's like this,
I did not realize that because I also have never used a grapefruit knife. So it looked like he was just fixing a bent knife to me.
No, but like, you know, as he's going into that grapefruit, it looks like a man who is versed at stabbing things. And but then, you know, when he's seeing this kind of hesitation on her face, you know, and responding to that, he's interpreting it wrongly. You know, he's interpreting it to be maybe I don't know, like she's off or whatever, but he could also be suspecting that she might be onto him, you know, that maybe she's figured out that he's the killer, you know. And so there's this breakdown in communication that's happening throughout this scene as he's about to basically propose, again in a very like kind of rushed way,
right?
But her sort of hesitation and reluctance can be interpreted. It's like this very ambivalent sequence that ends with him kind of gripping her and saying, "No buts," you know, just a simple yes or a no.
A simple yes or no will do, which is like chilling.
Well, it's
in a proposal.
It's chilling if it's a murderer, right?
Yeah.
But it's like cool if it's like, you know, Humphrey Bogart in this whirlwind romance, you know, where everything has been very. I mean, even the very first time they kiss, right? He puts his hands like around her neck. It's not like a ginger, like holding, like even the way that it's framed up, he's standing, she's kind of seated, and there is kind of something aggressive and sinister about it.
Right.
You know?
Well, and also because we know this other woman was maybe choked or that's his theory anyway.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I guess I just that sequence is so great. And after he's popped the question, she's you know getting stressed out, and then the coffee is boiling, and the coffee, and she has to get up. Like people who have not seen this scene will not know what I'm talking about, but if you have seen it, you'll know that everything is timed like so perfectly to just amplify the tension and the dramatic irony.
Right.
There's this great moment in the kitchen where when they're together and he says, you know, she says, "I really loved the love scene in that script." And he says, "Yeah, well, it's because they don't talk about it. And look at us. You know, anybody looking could it's clear to them. They could see we're in love." And it's like, I don't know, man. You know, like looking at this, it's clear to see that like that she doesn't trust you, you know? And so it's just sort of hammering in that things are not as they seem for all of these characters, you know, and that there's this double value that's present throughout. So yeah. It's really awesome.
Yeah. I mean, what else though? Let me look at my notes.
I feel like the film's ahead of its time. You know, I was surprised at its being 1950. Now, I'm not like any sort of you know expert at films from this period, but again, like it just feels like such a nuanced and dynamic take on you know what is really just sort of like this kind of what's the Shakespeare, this like star-crossed lovers, like this doomed relationship, you know, and it's doomed not just because of circumstance, but also somehow because of these characters, you know. I think that...
I mean, that's what I like about the movie is that it's about their relationship, really.
Right. You know, and the title, In a Lonely Place, I mean, it could refer to a lot of things. It's taken from his description of the murder when he's asking them to imagine it. He says, you're in the car and you drive to a lonely place. So there's that specific reference. Right. But then I think also there's the state where we find him at the beginning of the film, basically a lonely guy. In this way, he sort of lines up with the film noir archetype of the loser. He's kind of a nobody. He arrives at this industry watering hole, and kids are outside asking for autographs, and one of them says, "Don't get his autograph. He's a nobody," or something like that. So there's that sense of being in a lonely place. But really, I think that I take it to mean the loneliness of a relationship that's not really based on mutual trust and love. The loneliness, the really like sublime and painful loneliness of being in the midst of a, amorous whirlwind romance that is destined for failure. Yeah,
well, so there's this line, and this is right after they're on the road, and he blows up and almost kills this, this guy in road rage, and he's sitting in the car with her, sort of cooling down, and I think it's then when he talks about this line that he came up with for his screenplay, which is, "I was born when she kissed me, I died when she left me, I lived a few weeks while she loved me," which feels like a recognition of like the fact that this isn't going to last, that he knows that on some level.
Right.
And so then near the end of the movie, she repeats part of that line.
Yes.
But yeah, it's interesting how he's so controlling too. Like he doesn't answer his own phone, right? Like that's repeated throughout the movie. He doesn't answer phone calls, but he will answer her phone.
Yeah.
Like on multiple occasions, he'll answer out of suspicion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which is like he's closed off and you can't get through to him, but he will like try to control you by listening to your phone calls. Yeah, right.
It's one of the things that I really like about films from this period, the ones that I've seen, despite at times being a little on the nose, say with this line, right? That gets repeated. You could say, okay, that's a little on the nose, but actually there's a lot of texture to these characters and to what's going on that isn't made explicit. It isn't really like anybody's standing there saying like, this is not a good relationship. You should not aspire to this. In a lot of ways, like we are really kind of buying into the romance and the excitement of it, but it's also showing us how that's destructive, and self-destructive, there's a lot of space for really like looking at these characters and reading between the lines and looking at their actions, as you have here, for instance, with the phone calls, and sort of seeing these dynamics, these kind of toxic dynamics at work.
Right.
So I think that there's maybe like a superficial way of viewing the film as like just one kind of romantic tragedy, but then there's all of this layered kind of like psychological depth that you can get to as soon as you start kind of scratching at the surface a bit. And for instance, noting that Gloria Grahame's character is lying to the police right from the beginning, right? She says, I saw her leave, and I saw him from my balcony, but that's not what we saw. What we saw when she was at her balcony was when that girl was still there. They were at the windows, and
I assumed that maybe she had looked again later or something.
Sure.
But that's a good point. Like we know that what she's saying is true, but we don't know that she actually knows that herself.
Well, we don't know that what she's saying is true, right? We don't know if he didn't leave afterwards.
That's true. We know he sent her off.
But what
then,
she says is that she saw into his bedroom and she saw him go to sleep, But when she saw into his bedroom, it was when he went to the window and opened the window and saw her at the balcony.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And what was going on, meanwhile, the coat check girl is telling the story and she's going, help, help, help. And he has to go back and tell her to shh, quiet, I've got neighbors,
Yeah.
So what we've seen actually is that she saw them go in, she saw him at the window, and she probably overheard a young woman screaming help, And so even though the film doesn't make a big point of this, right? If you sit with it for a little while, you realize, wait a second, she's probably playing cover for him from the beginning, And this is another way in which she kind of resembles another film noir archetype, the femme fatale. Because, even though I would call this a film noir because it clearly is working with these elements, sort of like variations of a theme, it doesn't fit neatly into that description.
Right. She starts off, as you mentioned, playing it cool.
Yes.
But she gets increasingly vulnerable and,
totally,
doesn't really have any tricks to pull. It just the confrontation ends up being very direct.
Exactly. And so it's another reason why I like this film so much is because I like film noir. And one of the things I like about the genre is that it's a lot of fun, it's super cool, and that's this too. But it also has like this kind of the psychological realism that runs a little deeper and has a little something more to say about the nature of relationships, in men and women.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes is when they're in the club, like the jazz club together. They've gone out. He's in his nice formal attire. She's in this great dress. They're sitting at the piano as a woman plays.
I Hadn't Anyone Till You, I think.
Yep, that's it. And there's really no dialogue. We really just are sort of treated to like a full sort of like segment of this song and just various shots of the two of them sitting there smoking, drinking their cocktails, just looking like the epitome of cool, But there's something very somber, like very melancholic, very like distant even between them, even as it's like kind of perfect. And I love this sequence because it's like the director understands that nothing needs to be said right now. Like this scene sort of speaks for itself, and the music speaks for itself, and the circumstance and these characters just sheer presence, and it's so rich. It's a really delightful scene, and the only thing that's said is something that's kind of like whispered between the two of them after the song has finished.
Yeah, that's great. So this is another question I had is like one of the characters who I'm not sure if he's superfluous or what, but there's this old washed up actor.
Yeah.
And he's kind of this very cliche, thespian, always quoting Shakespeare and being drunk and, as far as I can tell, the only real function he fulfills is to like make Dixon a little bit sympathetic at the beginning because he's kind of defending him when he slugs this guy. And after that, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any other real point of this character?
Well, I mean, I think
because he keeps showing up.
Yes, I think that perhaps it could be just as simple as a little bit of comedic relief, a little bit of something to lighten the mood,
right.
To make the cast of characters around this guy a little more eccentric.
Yeah.
But I also think that perhaps more significantly, he helps to like continue to like problematize this guy's character, Dixon Steele, because on the one hand, we see him from the beginning sort of defending him, but there's clearly like a real like sympathy between the two of them, you know, like this guy, this washed up thespian, if we're not sure about Dixon Steele's heart of gold, it seems pretty clear that this guy's got a heart of gold. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he likes Dix, you know, and Dix likes him. And so that kind of counts for something.
Right.
And we're reminded of that throughout the film. And yet this guy is a drunk.
Yeah.
You know, he is kind of an outcast, just like Dix is.
Yeah.
And so we can fall back on, well, maybe that's really just the one thing that kind of keeps them together, you know? So I think that for me, that character, the main thing that he's doing is continuing to like have us, the audience, walk this plank of like uncertainty, not knowing what to make of Dix. Is he actually a good guy or is he a monster? And there's a character who sort of speaks for us at a certain moment when Laurel goes to the detective's house to speak with his wife. The two of them, this is when she first begins to confide some of her fears, some of her uncertainties, some of her doubts. And she's hoping to get some reassurance. She's hoping that the wife will kind of just laugh this off, but she doesn't. Yeah. And that's really a big turning point for her. But what does the wife say? You know, she says like, you know, or Laurel says something like, you know, he'll do something terrible but then the next day he'll, you know, come in with you know, packages under his arm and he's so sweet. And the wife finishes her sentence saying like, and then you feel ashamed for ever having thought anything, you know, negative about him or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. But it's like, this is the dynamic that the audience goes through where you see him do something and you kind of have to just go, ugh. Right. But then he does something so sweet and you're on his side again, you know? And so this kind of whiplash, this kind of not doubting yourself, this is where you're at throughout the film. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the film has some flaws. I think I noted near the beginning, there's a lot of music. It's like this really hyperactive kind of like semi-comical music that's just really distracting. Yes. In the first, few scenes of the film. It does get better. Yeah. It definitely does. Yeah. But early on, it does feel, and maybe this is something of its time, like being 1950. Sure. Yeah. It feels like maybe it's trying a little too hard to like sometimes like lighten this character or something to make us sympathetic by like making it a little bit quirky and kind of and then there's the scene where like we get this like nightmare sequence where we're hearing the voiceovers of other lines from the movie that we didn't, and this is like a surprisingly this technique has a lot of longevity because you get it in like the 90s movies too, but just like a line that we just heard literally being repeated like 30 seconds earlier being repeated in her sleep. But this movie, spoiler, what I love about it is like the way that it concludes. Like it increases in power as it goes on. Yes. And like increasingly like packs this emotional weight that I didn't necessarily expect at the very beginning of the film. But what I love about it is that like the entire investigation is like a red herring. Yes. It's like, in fact, they get a call just after they've had this last big fight. Because he discovers that she's been trying to escape and leave him before they, go off and get married in Vegas. He gets the call saying, we're sorry, you're in the clear. The guy who actually killed this woman confessed, and, we're sorry for putting you under all this stress. And he hands the phone to her, and the police chief tells her, and she says, yesterday this would have meant so much to us. Now it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And it's just like, it's so heartbreaking. Yeah. I mean, not that we wanted
the relationship to work exactly, but we do in a broad sense,
sure,
you know,
of course.
like we want it to be a good relationship.
Yes.
But it's like, wow, yeah, because it's what was brought out of him under that stress that matters.
Right.
Like, it's not the fact that he was suspect ultimately.
And her, frankly,
And
you know,
her,
like
yeah.
that she was going to abandon him because she lies to him. She accepts the proposal.
Yeah.
She lets him take her around town, buy her stuff, and she's going to do the same thing that she did with her last you know, fiance, is just sneak out.
That's
on
true.
him,
That is
you
good
know?
context. Yeah, because I had like excused her saying like he's just not letting her out of his sight, and so
Yeah.
she's has no opportunity to escape yet, and that's why
But she's just not being honest with him,
Right.
you know, and she's basically ready to break his heart. Now, she has her reasons, or so she thinks.
She's afraid,
you know?
yeah.
But from his perspective, he's innocent, and this is another person who won't believe him, you know,
Yeah.
who won't trust him.
Yeah.
And so I think that what I love about those last few lines there is that in a way, it's what you kind of wish she would have said. She could have been able to say from the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, like, thanks for calling. Thanks for letting us know. But it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
Because I know him. I trust him. I love him, you know. But that's the problem, is you don't know him. You don't trust him. And so you don't love him. That's the thing, is that like what they're caught up in is not really love, and the ending gives the lie, you know, to it, is that there was no love here, really. There was infatuation,
Yes,
there was
for sure.
fascination,
Yeah.
you know, there was this grasping at something and pretending at something.
Wanting, because he says, I've been looking,
Yes.
really wanting desperately for this to be.
But it's doomed from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because it's not really, it's not a serious, it's not a serious thing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I find myself more sympathetic with her, you know, at the end, and kind of feeling like, oh, she's escaped, you know, because
Sure,
you're afraid
yeah.
that he's gonna choke her to death or something. But
Yeah,
but at the same time, you make a very good point that she's a very broken, pathological person as well.
Yes.
And they're both left in a lonely place at the end. I mean,
Yes.
the final shots of that film really underline that, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
that they're both left. Neither of them has really, you know, I don't know if that we can say either of them has really advanced
No.
at all.
No, I mean, both, basically each of them has rehashed what we know of their immediately prior relationship, you know? She trying to walk out on her on someone that she agreed to marry, and he roughing up
Right.
someone that...
What's up with that creepy masseuse lady? Who maybe she's right in the end, but like,
Yeah, I don't know.
she seems like a witch or something. She's like telling her, she's the masseuse who's been with her for a while, and is telling her, you know, you should have stuck with the last guy. And
yeah, well, I
all
mean,
this.
you know, she's one of the things that I like about these movies is they're so kind of, these movies about the industry, you know, it's like you kind of get to see a little bit of the
She's an aspiring actress too. We didn't mention Gloria Grahame's character.
Right. But you see a little bit of the blue collar working class that exists, you know, around Hollywood as well. You know, and this masseuse is kind of one of those characters, you know, like she probably services a lot of celebrities, you know, and actresses,
And acts as kind of like a therapist to them.
and a gossiper, you know, because she's gossiping about what she's heard about his past relationships, and you know, significantly, Laurel is giving ear to that. She asks for it, you know. So like, yeah, while I definitely agree that probably we're more sympathetic toward her character than toward Humphrey Bogart's, I think that that's probably a consequence of just
the fact that she's a woman and she's in the weaker position.
Yeah,
in a way.
you know,
yeah.
But she like, you know, asks for it basically, you know, like this distrust, you know, she gives ear to it, and it's you know, it's probably not a good idea to be like basing your judgments about somebody's character more on what you've heard about them than on what you are actually engaged in this relationship with someone, you know, and so you're not really being forthright and honest then in the relationship, you know.
Right. So this is directed by Nicholas Ray. What do you know about him, James?
Not much, you know. I mean, I this is the first time we're doing a film by Nicholas Ray, and he's a major director from this period.
Right.
So
he directed Rebel Without a Cause,
right.
which I haven't seen.
Yeah, that's an awesome movie.
Johnny Guitar, which is the only other one that I have seen.
Another
by him.
awesome movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's done. I think he's done some good melodramas. Yeah, I don't know much about him except to say that he's obviously a good director, because so much of what makes this film work is driven by like this directorial hand that's very invisible, right? When it's not always the case. It's not like a truism that the director's hand needs to be invisible in order to be good. Right. But here it is very good and it's very invisible. Yeah. You know, like even little things like, for instance, right before this incident of road rage where he like beats up somebody and almost kills them, he's driving like mad, you know, through like Malibu or the Hollywood Hills or, you know, Mulholland Drive. It's like, you know, it's a windy kind of road out in the canyons, very dangerous to be driving so fast and so recklessly. And Gloria Grahame's character is just trying to play it cool. You know, she's just being, she offers him a cigarette, she lights up one, you know, but like we get this cut to her feet, you know, like rammed up against the, like she's trying to slam on the brakes, you know, but so it's like, this, we get this cut to show us what's really going on with her, you know, despite what we're seeing in this cold, expression out in her face. And there's just a lot of really smart things like that throughout the film that really clue us in, you know, to what's going on in this film that has so much to do with things not being as they seem, you know, and people trying to put on fronts. And so, stuff like that, which, you know, of course, like, is mainly thanks to the director and the director knowing that this is perfect, like right here, boom, you know. No, I mean, you're usually the research guy.
Yeah. Well, I figured you'd seen Rebel Without a Cause anyway, which I haven't. I've
seen a few Nicholas Ray films.
This is one of these directors that, you know, as time goes on and people are kind of like looking for, I don't mean to suggest that he wasn't any kind of big deal at the time or anything, but as time goes on and people are kind of looking back at who are some of these directors who are not maybe like the John Ford and the Orson Welles and kind of the top rank, but who are these directors who have kind of like their own style and their own legacy. Because I think he became a teacher too later on of some kind. You know, there's kind of like a renewed appreciation. And this is also one of those guys who, like in France, you know, the guys over there are really appreciating, like at the time, you know?
Right.
And so yeah, he's got this kind of, he's one of the guys that they're going to feature on the Criterion Channel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he's got a name. He's not one of the big, you know, the all-time titans, but he's got his own kind of thing going on. Yeah,
but I mean, he's super influential. Rebel Without a Cause, I mean, we'll probably, if this podcast goes long enough, you know, maybe. Yeah,
I've never seen any James Dean.
Yeah, well,
movies.
He's great. But, you know, talk about psychological realism, right? Like, I think that's probably also an area where Nicholas Ray's direction can be seen, is like the precision, the acting precision that's going on in these scenes. It's really exceptional, you know, and anybody who has seen this film or goes to watch it now after hearing this conversation, I just, again, like mention this grapefruit scene. It's so great. It's like a masterclass, watching the way these characters are reacting to each other and this dance that's happening where there was the communication is breaking down because they're interpreting things differently. These signals that are being given from one place but are being received in another way. And so I think that that thread continues in some of Nicholas Ray's other films, like A Rebel Without a Cause, where there is a real, I think, psychological realism and depth and heft in these characters and in the drama that I think, is maybe another way in which it feels a little ahead of its time to me,
Well, for our next episode, as we're recording this, it's the day after the news of David Lynch having died. And so our next episode, we are going to do The Elephant Man, which I've been wanting to watch for a while. So looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Go to Catholic Culture and CatholicCulture.org and subscribe to our email newsletters if you want to know what else we have going on the site. I just put out my list of my favorite movies that I watched in the past year. Some of which we covered on this podcast, but many of which we did not. So you'll get some new stuff there as well. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.